Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Monday, June 1st, West Fargo City Commission meeting. At this time, please join me in a pledge of allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States
of America,
the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The first order of business is to the approval of the order of the agenda. They have been distributed. We do have some changes. On the consent agenda, there will be an item I. That is a gaming site authorization for Bar 9, and they are sponsoring the West Fargo Rural Fire Department. Also, in the regular agenda, item number 3 is a public hearing for the Renaissance Zone renewal. And for notation, it has been published in the newspaper twice. So it was just an omission on the preparation of the agenda for this evening. But item number 3 will also include a public hearing.
I would make a motion to approve.
Commissioner Jurdevig moves to approve the agenda with the amendments as noted. Is there a
I'll second.
Commissioner Olson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the order of agenda as amended with item I in the consent agenda and item number 3 being a public hearing. Is there any further discussion? We'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order is approval of the minutes of May 18th, 2020. They have been distributed. They are on pages 2 through 4 in the packet.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Thorstad. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of May 18th, 2020 as distributed. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next order of business is item D, building permits. The activity report has been distributed, as well as the monthly comparison report. Are there any additions or corrections to the building department's monthly report?
I would make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdevig. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Olson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the building permit report distributed. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order is consent agenda. They have been distributed. It is items A through I. And again, I'll make a notation that I was added to the agenda. It's a gaming site authorization for Bar 9 at the light. The West Fargo Rural Fire Department is the benefactor of that. Commissioners?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. With the amendment, please, sir?
Yes, with the amendment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a second, please? Seconded by Commissioner Jurdevig. Been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda as with item I. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on, we are now in the regular agenda. Item number 1 is the liquor sales for restaurants and bars with takeout orders. Mr. Shockley.
Good evening, Mr. Commission President, members of the West Fargo Commission. This is requested to be put on the agenda to have a motion for the City Commission to extend the moratorium allowing bars and restaurants to continue with takeout orders, including alcoholic beverages, for a period of 90 days. So we just need a motion and a second to approve that, and then you could continue it for another 90 days. It is set to expire tonight at tonight's commission meeting at midnight if no further action is taken.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Any questions for Mr. Shockley?
With the bars being able to be open, is there still a need to have this?
My understanding, Commissioner Olson, is that some of the public still isn't as full as some of their patrons. So it's just an opportunity for them to continue to provide that service and generate the income.
Well, and did I hear correctly that Fargo is actually considering permanently allowing that? I believe it was brought up in their.
They have that commission. Yes, Commissioner Jurdevig, you are correct, and they even had a discussion about the possibility of mixed drinks.
In order to make it permanent, it would require an ordinance change. Tonight would just be to extend the moratorium.
Well, I think it would make sense for us to extend it for 90 days, and that allows us also to see what Fargo does in that time frame. If they make it permanent, then I think just so that our bars and restaurants are competitive, I would think that would be something we'd want to consider. So I guess I would make a motion to extend it for 90 days.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdevig. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Thorstad seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve an addendum that allows for liquor sales for restaurants and bars with takeout orders for 90 days. Is there any further discussion? We proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Item number 2 is the report on a Daktronics video board located at 32nd and Cheyenne. Mr. Lance Johnson with Epic Companies.
Hi, can you hear me, everybody?
Yep.
It's fine.
Thank you for taking time tonight to let us talk real quick. Part of our conditional use permit is that we report back to this commission 2 months after the video board is in operation. So that's the intent of tonight's discussion. We've been monitoring the board for the last 2 months. I did send a report that showed that the electronic eye is working correctly. The lumen level is well below the amount that was stated in the conditional use permit. We've done some tweaking with the moving of the electronic eye to make sure that it dims down properly. We've tested several times. I've also tested it with foot candles, which doesn't equate to lumens, but we've been monitoring it heavily and happy with the results. So at this point, operationally, it seems to be working as planned.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Is there any questions of Mr. Johnson? With that report now in hand, Mrs. Fisk, I have a question for you. Will you be responding to the family that has raised concerns or someone that you'll designate?
I will prepare a response letter.
Communicate with them?
Sorry, President Dardis. Yes, I will prepare a response to them and add in the information provided by Lance and his group and get that sent out this week.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisk. Any questions of Mrs. Fisk or Mr. Johnson? This is not an actionable item. just for your information, commissioners. Any other questions? Moving on to item number 3, which is the Renaissance Zone Renewal, Lauren Orchard, our Economic Development individual, and there is also a public hearing with this. Ms. Orchard.
Thank you, Commission President Dardis. Tonight, I'm requesting that the Commission open a public hearing regarding the 5-year extension of West Fargo's Renaissance Zone program, and then consider a resolution confirming that extension. But before the floor is open to public comment, I would like to briefly review the Renaissance Zone program, which was adopted by West Fargo in 2000 and has since brought over 80 projects of reinvestment to the city. First, the program requires geographic limits where the incentive can be applied, and West Fargo's Renaissance Zone is comprised of 33 blocks and 480 parcels, primarily commercial and industrial properties along Main Avenue, Cheyenne Street, and industrial parks to the north. You'll also see that some residential blocks are included, and both homeowners and business owners can benefit from the program. These blocks have been chosen specifically to target redevelopment along West Fargo's major corridors to revitalize the image of the city while strengthening our tax base. The boundaries of the zone have not been changed for this renewal application, but could still be modified by the Commission at a future date if you so choose. Those located within the identified blocks can apply to the Commission for a Renaissance Zone incentive, and if awarded, benefit from a reduction in taxes, making significant improvements to their property. And this incentive has been very popular, and we expect it will continue to be a vital tool in the development of West Fargo's economy. To continue using the Renaissance Zone program, however, the state requires that communities submit an application for renewal every 5 years. And for West Fargo, that deadline is June 6th, which is this Saturday. The core document requesting renewal is the development plan, which was included in your packet. And I would welcome any questions from commissioners regarding that document. You would have seen that included in the development plan were letters of support from both the county and the school district who are in favor of an extension, and staff also published notice for public hearing twice in the paper and included contact information to receive public comment. I have not yet received any public comments from that process, but I would welcome a public hearing being opened by Commission President Dardis.
Thank you, Ms. Orchard. Are there any questions for Ms. Orchard? Any questions for Ms. Orchard? Hearing none, we're going to close the regular agenda. We're going to move into the public hearing portion of this. We are now in a public hearing to discuss the Renaissance Zone renewal for a 5-year extension beginning June 6th. Are there anyone that would like to speak to the Renaissance Zone renewal? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak with regard to the Renaissance Zone? Is there anyone that would like to speak to the Renaissance Zone renewal? Hearing none, the public hearing is closed. We're back on the regular agenda. Commissioners, do you have any additional questions from Ms. Orchard with regard to the information that she's provided us this evening?
I'll make the motion to approve
Where's your
the
final, sir?
resolution to continue the program.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdovic. It's been moved and seconded to approve the zone renewal for a 5-year period beginning June 6th of 2020. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Orchard. Next order of business is item number 4. It's the presentation and final report on the 9th Street Corridor Study. This will be presented by City Engineer Dustin Scott, and Commissioner Olson will also speak to the issue. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, and good evening, Commission President Dardis and members of the Commission. Actually, I have a guest with me today that gets to do all the presenting on this one. Brent Mouche from Apex Engineering, the lead consultant on the job. He's already prepared a presentation and given a presentation to MetroCog. And so he is here to give that same presentation to the West Fargo Commission tonight. And then, as you mentioned, Commission President Dardis, we would like to take the opportunity to revisit Commissioner Olson's previous discussion on the truck route. So I guess with that, I'm going to ask that Mr. Brent Mouche take over and start the presentation on the corridor study.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Mouche, welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner President Dardis and members of the Commission. Thank you, Dustin. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here for you so that you can see the presentation. So this is a study on 9th Street, a study that we began in about April of last year with MetroCog and the City of West Fargo Planning and Engineering Departments, and recently wrapped up the final report and submitted that to MetroCog for approval through the TTC and the Policy Board last week. The study area on 9th Street starts at 13th Avenue East, kind of right by Family Fair and the red carpet car wash there, and then was a 2-mile stretch all the way up through Main Avenue and up to 12th Avenue on the north end of the industrial park there. So some kind of the major players along the corridor: West Fargo High School, City Hall. Of course, you've got Ellie Berger Elementary School just on the west side, and then the industrial areas. The development is starting to take off in that area. So why this study? Why is it needed? Well, 9th Street is a vital corridor to West Fargo and really the entire metro area. Major corridor between 45th Street and Cheyenne. Also, the city's seen an increase in land development and traffic, especially in the industrial area north of Main Avenue. Part of the study was to kind of look at some safety concerns and pedestrian and bicycle mobility, more so in the southern area of the study, and then ultimately develop some short-term, mid-term, and long-range alternatives that the city could implement and incorporate into a capital improvement plan. So we kicked off the study with some public input meetings, online surveys. We had 2 public input meetings. Our second meeting came after we developed some alternatives, and some of you might remember that that second meeting was held in January on the same day, just in advance of a commission meeting, and so we had really good attendance at that public input meeting. We also got some targeted public input from people who are attending a West Fargo High School basketball game, and then also met directly with some of the businesses and property owners in the industrial area at Terracon Consulting at their lab right on 9th Street, right across from Hazers. And we also did a couple online surveys, had really good response to our online surveys, and did a really strong social media and online advertising push, and touched over 1,000 different eyes with that effort. The public input, what we heard was that people were looking for an improvement in the traffic signals, traffic flow in general. And actually, since then, I know the city's been working towards that kind of separately from this project. But some other items of concern were pedestrian and bicycle safety, connectivity, and then safety and speeding concerns, especially kind of in that rural area near the high school and City Hall. One other topic that we touched on and worked with some contacts in the the trucking industry was the gap that we have kind of between 13th Avenue and Main Avenue. It was identified as 9th Street was identified as a potential link between those two east-west corridors. And so we worked with Mark Walter from Midnight Trucking and some of his contacts he was sharing with his counterparts in the trucking industry. And some of the feedback that we got was that, it's kind of an apparent potential link, but they did have some concerns routing trucks near schools through the residential area. A grade separation at the BNSF railroad tracks just on the north side of Main would obviously make the entire 9th Street corridor a much more appealing route. But we also did get some feedback that the trucks prefer to stay on the multi-lane routes, and if 9th Street wasn't going to be expanded to where they've got more than 2 lanes in one direction, that's kind of a negative for 9th Street at this point. So that was a little bit of the feedback.
Excuse me.
On that.
Could you explain the definition of grade separation at the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad
Yes.
track?
Yep. So essentially an underpass or overpass at the railroad tracks.
I asked the question for the public to make them understand.
Yeah, very good. And that would essentially eliminate the potential to have to wait for a train to cross at that location. There are between 60 and 70 trains that go through that point on any given day. Traffic-wise, 9th Street is, as we know, down by 13th Avenue was recently reconstructed, where an additional northbound lane was added. And so now we've currently got about 12,000 vehicles down in that area. And up at the north end of the study area by 12th Avenue, just under 3,000 vehicles a day. And so the current roadway as it's built out does have enough capacity to handle the vehicles that are there. And one of the things we wanted to study and look at was into the future, were those same lane configurations going to be adequate to handle the traffic that was coming? And so we worked with MetroCog on developing a forecast out to 2045 and came up with a traffic increase anywhere from about 3,000 to 5,000 vehicles per day throughout the corridor. And so really we're still within the capacity of the existing roadway sections, having the 3-lane roadway south of Main Avenue and then 2 lanes north of Main Avenue. We did start to see some issues at Main Avenue with traffic backing up on the southbound and northbound left turns, and then also at 10th Avenue just south of the high school, really with the eastbound and westbound movements through there. But again, there wasn't not enough traffic at 10th Avenue in the future to warrant a traffic signal. So we developed alternatives for the 3 segments and basically tried to split the segments up so that we could kind of refine the alternatives and not try to apply one alternative through the entire corridor. So the first segment is from 13th Avenue East to 7th Avenue East. Again, this is the segment that was recently partially reconstructed. An additional northbound lane was added. And so the base alternative that was kind of chosen or recommended for that segment was to reconstruct that hybrid 4-lane at a point when the portions of the road that weren't reconstructed 2 years ago start to break down. So that's why it becomes a long-range alternative. Also included and carried forward would be a 3/4 median at Prairie Parkway. That's the intersection just to the north of 13th Avenue. I believe that was an alternative that was kind of looked into when that project was originally being planned. And then also as a short-range alternative to enhance the pedestrian signals, the crosswalks at 10th Avenue and 8th Avenue. There's some new technology, some newer products rectangular rapid flashing beacons that are much more conspicuous, much better at catching people's attentions, and have a higher compliance rate of about 80 to 90% compliance for getting people to stop for pedestrians. So, and that's a relatively low cost upgrade to those crossings as well. Segment 2, moving north from 7th Avenue East up to Main Avenue. Again, not enough of an increase in traffic in that area to warrant expanding beyond a 3-lane. So the base alternative recommended was to reconstruct that. And along with that, make sure that the 10-foot bicycle path does extend all the way up to Main Avenue. There's a point near City Hall where the 10-foot path drops off to a regular 5 or 6 foot sidewalk. And that would be a mid-range alternative, kind of in that 5 to 10 years when it's expected that the pavement's going to start to break down beyond its useful life. Also included in the preferred alternatives is a 3/4 median at Somerset Drive. That's kind of the type of intersection where you can't take a left from a side street onto 9th, and that would ultimately help some of the queuing, traffic backing up from 7th. Somerset Drive is near 7th Avenue, and so in the future, if queuing and traffic backing up becomes a problem, that 3/4 median is a solution in the long range. And then also with that, the city expressed some desire to have the 1st Avenue East intersection just south of Main Avenue, that intersection, and then 1 block to the east reconstructed as part of the project to just kind of clean up that intersection. The 3rd segment from Main Avenue East to 12th Avenue Northeast, that's through the industrial area. Again, the amount of traffic in this area is not to the point where a 2-lane roadway can't handle it, but with the amount of development going on, the amount of trucks turning and access points and things like that, when this road is rebuilt in the future, since it is kind of a 2-lane rural section, the preference was to reconstruct it with a new 3-lane roadway. So it would be a similar section to 9th Street south of Main Avenue, that 1 lane in each direction with a shared center left turn lane. And then along with that, extending the 10-foot multi-use path all the way up to 12th Avenue Northeast, where a path was installed when that road was reconstructed a couple years ago. So that kind of completes the bicycle and pedestrian path up to that area as well. Also, one of the preferred alternatives included traffic signal revisions at Main Avenue for left turns. If you're trying to go north and take a left, or south and take a left onto Main Avenue, there's no dedicated turning phase. So we see some backups in the future with that, without that improvement. So that again is a fairly easy improvement that can be done in the short term. Also, with the path, we would recommend installing a quiet zone crossing at the BNSF railroad tracks north of Main Avenue. And then again, in the long range, for the city to continue exploring a grade separation, the underpass overpass solution at the BNSF railroad tracks just on the north side of Main Avenue. So ultimately, we kind of group these costs into short range, mid range, and long range costs. The cost for the short range improvements, kind of the 0 to 5 year timeline, is just about $200,000. The estimated cost for the mid range improvements, the 5 to 10 years, is about $12,600,000, and that, of course, that includes the reconstruction from 7th Avenue East all the way north to 12th Avenue Northeast. Would there be 2 projects there? And then long range, the 10 plus years out to 20, 30 years, kind of includes that grade separation at the BNSF Railroad underpass. So that total for that long range is about $24 million. And so thank you, Commissioner President and members of the commission for your time today, and I will entertain any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Musha. Commissioners, do you have any questions of the gentleman?
I'd have, or it might be more of a comment.
Please, Commissioner Jurdovic.
The only question I would have is, and I live very close to 9th Street and Prairie Parkway, just a few blocks from there. So I drive through that intersection 3-4 times a day, and most of my neighbors do. And you'd be surprised how many neighbors have sent me videos of close accidents they've had at that intersection. From apparently people have videos running in their cars all the time, which I didn't know. But and I've had tons of neighbors talking about that, because you can't, like, if you're turning there, you can't even see the oncoming traffic if you're turning onto Prairie Parkway against the traffic. So I don't see that as a long range thing when I think of that, because I think it's actually a problem today. But.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdovic. Any additional questions from Mr. Musha or Mr. Scott?
No, just a comment to follow up with Eric. When we rebuilt that street down there, part of the plan was to limit that access at the Prairie Parkway, and we even talked about a signal and other options. And in the end, we had a lot of pushback from the area businesses and stuff. And in the end, it ended up nothing was done to it. Maybe Dustin knows the whole story a little better, but at any rate, we've been aware of possible problems at the Prairie Parkway Family Fair corner, if you want to call it that. So you're right, Eric. It is problematic. It has been, but it's been a really tough juggling act to keep the area businesses there. I won't say satisfied, because I don't know if they ever get satisfied, but let's just say to try to hopefully meet their needs and balance that against safety aspects. So.
Thank you. Thorstead, additional comments, questions? Commissioner Olson.
Just that our task force on the truck route met after the last time we brought this up, and due to this report with all of the different things that need to be accomplished, we felt it was best to wait until we implemented the capital improvement plan, which I believe is next on the agenda, before we just went ahead and made this a truck route. We didn't want to have to reverse anything in case we didn't do anything within the capital improvement, which I believe if we wanted to, we could bump that median at Prairie Parkway from long range to short range if we wanted to. All depends on how it all works out with the capital improvement plan.
I'd add one thing to that, though. If you did that, I think you would have to move up the traffic signal at 10th Avenue East. There's a lot of people that couldn't get out. I mean, at 7:45 in the morning during the school year, trying to take a left-hand turn to get to Main Avenue. I mean, there's a lot of issues for a very short period of time. But if you eliminated the ability to do that at Prairie Parkway, I think you'd have to also look at the traffic signal at 10th Avenue.
Right. I agree, Eric. And along with that, we also have to look at the high school, where there's just a little island out there. There isn't the right signage there. There's accidents waiting to happen. Hopefully it never does. But there needs to be improvements made there, and even further south where the kids are crossing 9th Street to get to high school. So there's lots of things that all come into play, and that's why the truck route task force decided just to leave this off as designated as a truck route right now until all of these things are considered.
Commissioner Thorstead.
Yeah, I'll follow up on Commissioner Olson's comments there. And I see it is on the short range is to improve those crosswalks for pedestrians. I would highly recommend that becomes a very high priority. I use 10th a lot because I live just down the block from there. And pedestrians, I think there's a thing they can push button, but drivers don't know what in the heck a pedestrian crosswalk is anymore. And anything we can do to have flashing lights or better striping or whatever, because they still risk their life crossing there because too many people don't understand what a pedestrian crosswalk really is. So I would highly encourage, like Commissioner Olson said, even at 8th, they have the island, but it's not the best markings there either. Is whatever we can do to improve them sooner than later. It didn't look like a very huge expense. And I think there'd be a lot of benefit right away from doing those.
Thank you, Commissioner Thorstad. Any additional comments? Commissioner Musha or Mr. Scott? I would entertain a motion to approve the final report on the 9th Street corridor study.
I'll make the motion to approve the report.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second? Commissioner Jervik seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the final report on the 9th Street corridor study as presented by Apex Engineering and Mr. Scott. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Musha, for your presentation. Mr. Scott. Next order of business is item number 5, the presentation on a draft of the Capital Improvement Plan, CIP. Mr. Scott.
Well, thank you again, and good evening, Commission President Dardis, members of the Commission. I had the privilege over the last couple of weeks to meet with staff and each of the commissioners to review our draft of the capital improvement plan. I know it's been long awaited to move this forward, and I'm excited to finally be the one to get to present this tonight, and hopefully we're going to, certainly get into some detail, but we're going to stay relatively high level and get through this in a relatively brief manner. And then, of course, as always, feel free to interject questions, comments, as you see fit as we move along. I do want to put a reminder. I know we discussed this when we had our meetings, but I just want to remind the Commission and others listening in that tonight's presentation will not include, the full blown spreadsheet with all of that detail. And, again, we're going to stick to, for the most part, a high level presentation tonight. So with that, I will share my screen here. Are you seeing the screen yet?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so with the presentation tonight, we're going to go over just a high-level overview of our capital improvement plan, the process, and everything going on with our CIP. Then we'll move into just going to cover some of the existing infrastructure that we have, just a quick synopsis on some of the condition and other inventory-related information that we have on our existing infrastructure. That really is a basis and foundation for establishing a CIP. Then I'll move into the general process, and when I say the process, basically from start to finish, how do we go about creating this capital improvement plan? And then I'll also, in the middle here, go through some of the summary results of our proposed CIP. Then we'll have a brief slide on the funding that Jim had put together, and that will, for the most part, conclude the presentation. So afterwards, we'll again open up for discussion and questions. So as an overview, notice here I highlight the word "our capital improvement plan." I did that mainly to just iterate that there are several ways to view a capital improvement plan, go about creating one, and how each community uses it is unique and different. And so this is really our capital improvement plan and our view on this document. And so just keep that in mind, that though other communities might do something a little different, that's fine. There is no right, wrong way to do this. It's just what we're comfortable with. And that's, again, part of the objective tonight is to establish this comfort level on what we all feel is appropriate with West Fargo's capital improvement plan. Our CIP is going to be a living document outlining current and proposed infrastructure needs with estimated financial impacts. Again, key word there is living. It is meant to evolve and is subject to change as obviously our needs and day-to-days certainly change as well. It's a dynamic tool intended to help guide city staff and elected officials in prioritizing workflow and making capital investment and budget decisions. Again, the word dynamic there is highlighted just to reiterate that, you know, this thing is versatile. It's it's a great planning document. It can be used in several different ways, and it is again, not meant to be black and white and rigid. And we want this to be a transparent process with at least a minimum of an annual review and adoption by the City Commission. Public involvement is always critical and important. Now, up to this point, we haven't gone out and solicited individual public meetings or a specific public meeting to talk about all of the projects within our current plan. But as we move forward with any of the projects within this plan, we would certainly continue to provide the same kind of public outreach as we have been in recent years. And then on the bottom of the slide here, I highlighted in red, again, just to drive home the point that, this is not going to be a document that sets certain things in motion. This is, as I noted in the first line there, in the first red line, that all projects within the CIP will still follow standard city practices and policies for review and authorization. So, point being that just because the commission adopts this capital improvement plan, it does not give staff the directive to move forward with project expenditures or working towards completing any one of these projects. They will each come before the commission on an individual basis, just as we are doing today. And conversely, if there's a need that arises and a particular project is not identified on this plan, that does not mean that we can't, do an audible and bring that particular improvement forward to the commission to consider. Once, again, we would certainly evaluate the impacts from a budget standpoint. But again, point being that just because something's not on this list doesn't mean that we wouldn't address an issue and take that forward to the commission for an immediate implementation. The needs, priority, and financial abilities are continually evaluated. Again, just wanting to drive home the point that this capital improvement plan is ever evolving. So moving on to the existing infrastructure. Water main. We have over 194 miles of water main. And that is roughly the distance from the NDSU campus to the South Dakota State campus. Odd fact. We have about 12 miles of asbestos concrete pipe, 180 miles of PVC pipe, and then the remainder is either cast ductile iron or unknown types. We really end up having our most problems, of course, with anything that's not PVC. certainly the asbestos concrete pipe and some of the old cast iron pipe that is brittle. So those are focus areas. We have 170 miles of sanitary sewer mains. And again, just breaking down the different types of pipe there. And then 195 miles of storm sewers. Over 40 sanitary lift stations, over 70 storm pumping stations. We currently have 5 water storage tanks, roughly 45 retention ponds. The majority of them are wet ponds, but there are a handful of dry retention facilities as well. And of course, we have our 600 acres of lagoons on the north side of town. According to staff at Public Works, we average about 2 major water main breaks a year, roughly 20 service and gate valve breaks every year, at least 1 major sewer break. We deal with periodic street washouts due to poor storm sewer conditions. And we have frequent repairs of sanitary lift and storm pumping stations, so on and so forth. Again, just a lot of energy goes into replacing outdated infrastructure. From a transportation standpoint, we have over 370 lane miles of roads. So that's roughly the distance of I-94 in the state of North Dakota. We have 3.1 million square yards of pavement to maintain. That's the equivalent of 490 football fields of pavement. You put that in perspective, it's a big number to fathom. And we have 31 traffic signals. 28 of those are owned and operated by the city. 3 of them, of course, are owned and operated by the North Dakota Department of Transportation. And then others that I didn't get numbers for, we have pedestrian facilities, we have forestry, fiber optic cables out there that we maintain, and bridges, culverts, so on and so forth, over our river and other crossings like the railroad. What you see here is a pavement condition index. This is actually now a few years old. I believe this was a result of a study that was conducted back in 2016 or 17, but we still have this information reported in our cartograph system. And as you can see, out of all that pavement we have, the majority of it is actually in either excellent to fair condition, which is great news. Unfortunately, we do have a large amount, though, that is rated at poor or failed condition, which mostly is located within our core area. So staying in good condition requires a strong pavement management plan and obviously routine maintenance. With that comes the budget that needs to get set aside for that.
Mr. Scott, I have a question. With the percentage that you have in poor or failed condition, and with the 10 miles of gravel that we have, how heavily weighted are those areas in your decision-making process with Public Works and Finance when to prioritize those?
I apologize, Commissioner President Dardis. You've cut out quite a bit there. I heard something about gravel.
Let me try it again, Doug. With your percentage of failed and poor, and with the 10 miles of gravel, how heavily are those areas weighted when you're making your decision?
Well, that's a good question, Commissioner President. Technically, the gravel is not included in the pavement condition index. So when they've gone through and developed this report, there's a piece of equipment that drives around the city, and it really only, at least to my knowledge, and I guess I could be wrong. I'd have to go back and truly dive into that. But my understanding is that it does not include the gravel surfaces.
Okay, so when you refer to a gravel surface, that does not include alleyways? It's just streets that are designated streets?
Correct. For this pavement condition index. Yes.
All right.
That's where there was an outside agency that came through, many of this area, many of the municipalities in this area. They basically, they drive around with a specialized piece of equipment that is able to call it inventory pavement. And when I say pavement, that's asphalt or concrete surfaces. And then based on general practices and industry standards, they come up with a ranking and rating system, commonly referred to as a pavement condition index. And we do some manipulating to make sure that it's quote unquote calibrated to our way of managing pavement.
Right.
But again, it is limited to just the asphalt and concrete roadways, as far as I'm aware.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. So kind of capping off the existing infrastructure, just wanted to highlight some of the facilities, the larger scale facilities that we have throughout the town. And of course, we got, City Hall, Police Department building, library, 2 fire stations. And then Public Works has, their operational headquarters, their sanitation headquarters, and then various maintenance and storage buildings. Okay, so moving into our process and then of course the proposed CIP. So to start, certainly you need a good inventory and assessing the existing conditions. You do that on a continual basis. I did mention earlier that each city kind of handles the CIP differently, but I will say that's a pretty universal concept in terms of preparing and adopting a CIP. Is you really have to inventory and understand your existing infrastructure to even start moving on to the next phase of identifying needs. So once you do have a good idea of where your shortcomings are in the infrastructure, you of course then move on to identifying what those needs are. And most often, in at least for us in West Fargo, that's going to be based on institutional knowledge, whether it's Public Works, and I'd say more often than not, it is Public Works. They're out there, boots on the ground, dealing with our infrastructure, and they have the best handle on the condition that it's in and where our problem and susceptible areas are. There is, of course, every now and then we have a need to conduct further investigations and studies. And sometimes it's in the form of a street corridor study, like Mr. Brent Mouchet just presented on with the 9th Street. And then, of course, there is a study as elaborate as the core area infrastructure master plan that we recently concluded. So, of course, anytime that you can conduct such a thorough study like the core area master plan, that's certainly going to be your best opportunity to get more data, more information, more analysis, which just helps build your scope and identify exactly where your needs are and start to really come to the finer points of detail that really help not only build that roadmap, but now you have more information to build your cost estimates and so on and so forth. We also get public requests and, of course, developer petitions for improvements. Public requests often come in form of, I'd say the most common one that I'm familiar with are things like, speed reductions in neighborhoods. Can we get safer pedestrian crossings in the neighborhood? Can we get speed tables? We tend to get that a lot. There's also the, can we get better connectivity from point A to point B? There are various other requests that come up. Public Works ends up fielding a lot of those, but again, that is a way of using our cartograph software as a way that Public Works is able to track and at least keep a record of that kind of activity so that it can be implemented and put into the capital improvement plan. Developer petitions is generally going to be related to greenfield development, brand new infrastructure being extended into a green field. So that's a whole nother level of the capital improvement plan. Generally, for West Fargo, we're not going to try to foresee all the future developments, but as they do come, for example, the Wilds 20th edition, as they are petitioned and the commission approves to create those districts, we want to then at that point incorporate them into our capital improvement plan so that the not only from a budgeting and monetary standpoint, but it's also important to understand the impacts from our workflow. So then there's also other agency coordination. Our neighboring city, Fargo, for example, if they're planning to do something along the border, that certainly starts to spark an interest in getting those kind of improvements identified in the capital improvement plan. So just to recap the core area improvement master plan that I just mentioned, again, that was a study. Pretty much, it's hard to see here in this map, but from Drain 21 over to 9th Street, and just for a couple of the neighborhoods just to the north of Main Avenue is really where that focus was. That plan looked at all of our infrastructure and identified improvements, nearly $75 million worth of improvements over the next 10 years, where they came up with a prioritized list and, again, high-level cost estimates. The result of that study is where we looked to that and integrated it into our overall city capital improvement plan. So we don't have two separate CIPs. We don't have something on its own for that core area. We wanted to take that and integrate it into the rest of the capital improvement plan to see where everything is shaking out in terms of overall priority and overall budgetary impacts. So I did include a brief snapshot from our spreadsheet that we reviewed last week. And you can see here I've got just the years from 2020 to 22, the high level scope and priority for those particular years. So and that's where we're at. The next step in the process here is we got to identify and propose these improvements. And so doing so, we get a project description, a brief scope, identify a preferred schedule or a year to start construction, and then put a priority to that. And the next component is then estimating a cost. And again, that gets difficult to do without extensive studies, but that's where we come together and use our historical knowledge and try to guesstimate a high level cost so that we can, at least from a budgeting standpoint, plan and implement these projects. At this point, we are certainly having staff reviews, and as we've done over the last couple of weeks, we start to engage the commission on just even just to take a look at the projects. Jim Larson said it best last week when we were meeting at one of our meetings was, really the focus needs to be on the projects before moving to financing and the budget component. And again, just the focus there is that we want the projects to be considered based on the need and urgency of that infrastructure. So prioritizing, I won't get into this. I won't read all this verbatim, but we do have what we call in progress projects, and then a priority A, B, and C. The priority A, B, and C, for the most part, we have a general guideline here, but for the most part, that is going to be somewhat subjective and, initiated by staff. And of course, that's where the City Commission, in reviewing that project list, is going to help drive and steer that decision process. Then we get into identifying potential funding resources. So things like city revenue funds, special assessments, outside sources. And that's where then Jim works his magic and starts to look at this from a budget standpoint and runs an analysis to see where we stand financially based on the initial proposed scope and priority. And when that's all done, and we feel like we've got a solid basis for not only the list of projects and what financial commitments are going to be needed, but we also know that Jim has confirmed that we've got the money to move forward. That's where then again we conduct additional staff meetings with commissioners and get additional input. And then in conclusion, once all that's and we're comfortable moving forward with what we have, that's where then we would take our capital improvement plan to the City Commission for adoption. And I had these two lines here in red up earlier, but again, just wanted to just reiterate that this is still a living and dynamic document moving forward. So where we stand today with the projects that we have identified in our capital improvement plan, you'll see here we do have a 2019 column. For the most part, those are projects that have been completed, but they're still not financially closed out of the system. So we just want to recognize that value. We also have off to the right here, we have two other columns. One is showing a total for the years 25 to 29 and 2030 to 44. That is very long range planning. Naturally, we can't even pretend to think that we have a good handle on what will be needed in 10 to 15 to 25 years, but there are some needs that we can already identify. And so we want to move that into our capital improvement plan, although, again, the focus is going to be in this yellow shaded region, our current year and the next 4 years. So really, truly looking at a 5-year capital improvement plan. And this particular table is summarizing the total expected and estimated costs based on priority level of projects. So for example, right now in 2020, we are proposing roughly nearly $6 million of priority A projects, nearly $1 million of priority B, and $3 million of priority C. And we already have just over $22 million worth of projects in progress. Those are projects that are either under construction or very far along in either getting into design or, again, for the most part, in construction. So this next slide here is a similar format, but it is now focusing on what type of projects we have. We have this first row here called general and roads. That's pretty much not just our streets, but if we have facilities in the CIP and or miscellaneous projects that are not specific to water, sewer, and storm, it's all going to get rolled up into this first row here of general and roads. And as you can see, our 5 years here, we've got roughly $30 million in 2020, again, saw in the previous slide, and then $40 million in 21, 33 in 22, 18 in 23, and 46 in 24. Those are project totals. And again, that stuff, this is all a living, dynamic document. So until the commission is reviewing detailed information on a specific project, such as an engineer's report, these numbers are certainly subject to change. So now the last slide here will be on funding. Last couple slides here. And our funding sources currently, we have, our capital sales tax, utility fees. We have outside funding sources like local and state agencies and their cost shares, and state and federal grants. We have special assessments, bonding, other city funds. And as you see here, Operation Prairie Dog has got a strike through. Obviously, we're all aware that that's a pretty volatile funding source right now. It is not considered in our capital improvement plan from a budgeting standpoint. If we are lucky to come into that money, we will revise our CIP accordingly. But right now, we have ran or Jim has ran his financial analysis in a conservative approach, assuming that we are not receiving that funding mechanism. And really, this last slide here is all Jim. But instead of turning it over to him, I'll just recap it real brief. That again, it's showing our source of funds by year, and as you can see, projecting out to the all the way out to that year 2044. So I think with that, I'll turn this presentation back over to the commission for either additional questions or comments. And at that time, Jim can certainly comment on the funding aspect of this.
Commissioners, questions for Mr. Scott or Mr. Larson or Mrs. Fisk? Well, we were all engaged in this individually, meeting with works, finance, engineering, and administration. The spreadsheet in itself and the detail of which you've helped us identify some of those columns has been great. You've done a really nice job with that, Dustin, particularly when you even with Mr. Larson breaking down the funding methodology and the like. My first question is, in any of your numbers here, are there any capital improvements of physical facilities included? I know the answer, but I'd like the public to know the answer.
Yes, I'll answer that as best as I can, and then turn it over to either Tina or Jim to comment further. But yes, I will say that there's a couple facilities. One would be a new city hall facility. There are also a couple others relating to a new fire station, and then a new public works facility of some sort that I'm not recalling off the top of my head. But so yes, there are a few of those facilities. And again, I'd point it over to either Tina or Jim to comment further.
I can comment. Thank you, Commission President Dardis and Commissioners and Dustin. Yes, those items are in there just as placeholders to see how they would affect if we were to use capital improvement sales tax to fund some of the bonding of those, how that would affect our capital improvement sales tax balance. They're just placeholders in there because the commission has never approved. We have not gone through the RFI process for the city hall that you'd given us permission to look into. That got put on hold because of COVID. The fire station is probably the one that we're pretty sure is going to happen someday, but that's going to be a little bit of time yet. We're just Dan's working hard on land acquisition and trying to make some decisions. The city staff is working closely not only with Dan, but we're also working with the school district, and we're working with the library to try and find ways for all of our facility needs to be the most cost effective when the time comes that we move forward. So of course, these are all just kind of up in the air. And like I said, with COVID, we've just kind of put a a slowdown on a lot of the things. So just so that you're aware, they aren't in there because we think that we can just push them through, that there's a long process ahead involving you and the public.
My fellow commissioners and I were aware of that, Tina. I just wanted the public to be aware that it's one of the things. My next question to Mr. Scott is, when will there be some public input? When will it be on the city website or whatever for the public to review? I realize there's a process and approval and all of that with us, but what would you anticipate?
Well, I guess my thought, and certainly share your own, would be that tonight was more or less just to do a high level review here, and I may have gotten even more detailed than I had originally intended, but then move this on to the next commission meeting to formally adopt the CIP. And I guess my recommendation would be to once that is adopted, then we would move to place information, more specific information on our website. But one of the challenges in terms of that information is exactly what and how much detail, if you will. That's where to simply put the entire list and all that stuff. I think we're gonna have to try to think through in terms of how we present this so that it's not overly confusing. And so I don't think we've had a lot of discussion internally on that quite yet, but my recommendation would certainly be to provide information to the public on our website after the city commission has formally adopted this.
My point being is, now that we've had a discussion about it in a public meeting, I would guess that you're going to have some members of the public that are going to reach out and they're going to want something, and so staff is going to have to be prepared for that question.
Mr. Mayor, I just have one question or comment too.
Commissioners, anybody else? Commissioner Jurek, please.
And Dustin, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I just want to make sure, when you said I'm going to round $52 million of existing in progress projects, many of those projects and many of those dollars are actually projects that were done, for example, last year that were largely done, but they have not been 100% completed. So we didn't break ground on $52 million worth of projects this summer, is just a point I wanted to clarify.
Absolutely, Commissioner Jurevig. That summary breakdown I had for 2019, again, those projects are done. They, for the most part, the majority of them are relating to the bond the special assessment bond that we did last December. And again, we just haven't gone through the certification process yet. So they are still quote unquote pending. And as such, we wanted to capture that cost within this particular plan, just so that we know between those projects, and there are some others that, again, were started in either 2018 or even in 19, but have just not financially closed out. Another example would be our connection to Fargo. That was a roughly $8 million job, if I recall, that is included in this $57 million. So
I just wanted to make sure people realized we hadn't done that. We hadn't started all that in progress work right this year.
Correct.
And the public has reached out to my fellow commissioners and I with regard to that, because they know that there's going to be less state money available, potentially less sales tax. And I realize that Mr. Larson will have his pulse on that and us all abreast of what that is. But the public's perception is that, with the COVID and businesses and a lot of unemployed people, how we're going to approach, projects in this coming year, and the terrible word of special assessments potential and all that type of thing. So we'll be very diligent, and everybody will be sharpening their pencil.
Commissioner President.
Commissioner Olson, yes.
I can just see that our challenge is going to be in our transparency, that we need to make sure that after we do adopt this plan, that the public does understand that this is a living, breathing document that could change from time to time because of the items that Mr. Scott identified in the core area. We could have water main breaks that weren't on the plan, but then move forward, move up the chain and things like that. And plus, like we've already discussed in the 9th Street corridor, maybe we weren't thinking at the time to put in those additional pedestrian crosses and or changing the intersections at Prairie Parkway and 9th Street, but maybe we want to move them up. So our challenge is going to be getting the public to understand that just because we may adopt this plan doesn't mean it's all set in stone.
We're not spending the money.
Right.
As Mr. Scott so capably pointed out, this is a discussion, and anytime that we do, he wants to move a project forward, or Mr. Anvik in Public Works wants to move a project forward, they still have to come before us for approvals of engineering reports and spending the money. So this document is a roadmap, but the reality of it is that we have the ability to check it month to month, week to week, and literally day to day. So that's a very positive part, and that's part of the transparency that we can show the public. Mr. Thorsten.
Yeah, you guys just stole all my thunder, most of the thunder here, but I was going to say the same thing. People got to look at this just like our WF 2.0 plan. This is what this is. It's a plan that we're not adopting. All these projects are on here, like Commissioner Olson just stated. That could change. It's dynamic. We do project 1, it might affect project 2. It might affect when it's done, and so on and so forth. And the funding. One thing I do like, and my compliments to both Dustin and Jim, is that the spreadsheet they've created allows for a lot of, you can put variables in, funding variables, timing variables, stuff like that. So it really gives you a picture. We may only have a certain amount of money available, and allows you to maybe apply some of that money to certain projects and stuff like that. So I just want to make it known to the public, we're not adopting this whole list, and we're going to be building these under the schedule. And I think it's been pointed out by just about everyone here, and people just have to look at it as it's just like our long-range plan, except this is a long-range plan for infrastructure.
Any other questions of Mr. Scott, Mr. Larson, or Mrs. Fisk?
I have one comment.
Mrs. Fisk, please.
I want to thank all of you commissioners for taking all the time that it took to work through this. And I want to thank Dustin for all of his hard work, him and his staff, and those that assisted him, and Jim for his amazing job. But I also want to state that I totally agree with every single comment that you guys made. It's very important that as a city, we aren't doing what the citizens, as staff, we aren't doing what you requested us to do. And as elected officials, you're not doing what the citizens expect you to do if you don't at least have a plan, a fluid plan that can change based on what's going on around you. And this plan that's being put into place is going to be so interactive, and it's going to be wonderful. And at the end of the day, the citizens should be proud that we're planning and looking ahead, and trust the fact that you as commissioners are making sure that staff is doing the job that they need to do and bringing you the right information. So thank you.
I think there's one more point that I'd like to make, and that is that this just isn't a project list. Again, with the resources that we brought together, my fellow commissioners, Mrs. Fisk, Mr. Larson, Mr. Anvik from Public Works, and of course, Mr. Scott from Engineering. This is so much, and it's appropriate that they use the word dynamic, because this spreadsheet and the line items of how it approaches, it gives you the good news and it gives you the bad news. in the sense is if you're trying to forecast how we're going to finance this or pay for any of these types of improvements, there are percentages that can be changed in this at any point in time. So we have even very preliminary costs on what this might be. We have very preliminary costs or revenue sources that might be applied to this, as well as is if the revenue sources that we're applying to it don't cover it, what the potential special assessment might be. So it makes us aware on every single project. This is an extraordinary document, and I know we're kind of teasing the public right now about not sharing it with them immediately, but it is so well done, and it will be a great living document, and the public will have the opportunity to weigh in at some point in time. Again, any questions for Mr. Scott? Any more comments from any of the commissioners? Mr. Scott, would you like a motion to approve the draft, or is this a non-actionable item that we don't need to do that? We'll bring it back in a couple of weeks and actually approve it.
I think for tonight, it can be a non-actionable item.
All right, I would agree. So with that, are there any more questions with regarding to the draft capital improvement plan known as CIP to all of us around City Hall? Any additional comments? Thank you for all your work on all departments. Nice job. Item number 6 is a review of the engineer's report for sewer, water, storm, and street improvements for District 1331. Mr. Scott.
Thank you again, Commissioner President Dardis and members of the commission. Give me a minute here while I share my screen yet again. Okay, and are you seeing the screen?
We're good, yep.
Okay, so tonight, want to briefly go through the engineer's report for the Wilds 20th edition. I want to start by summarizing the report. It is a long and detailed document, but in short summary, the conclusions are that this development is able to be served with city infrastructure. So the feasibility of providing services here is certainly apparent throughout this report. And as you can see here, the action that I'll be requesting is to keep this project moving forward and approve the engineer's report, and then directing us to prepare the final plans and specifications. Like I said, this report is very long. You've had it at least the past few days. I'm going to skip over quite a bit of it and head right into the discussion that we kind of left off with when you directed us to prepare the engineer's report. And that was a lot of discussion relating to the extension of 9th Street. Specifically, how far to take 9th Street from its current position. And as you will see in the engineer's report that Moore Engineering has prepared, there are a handful of alternatives that they've considered and outlined here in the report. I'm not going to read all of these, but where their recommendation was, and I agree, is to, if and when we get to the point where we are opening bids for this project, it's to bid an alternate for extending this roadway. And in doing so, that's going to give us real dollars to then make a final decision on how to proceed. There are some other factors, of course, that go into this aside from the current dollars and the bids. And we'll get into that here now when I get down to a map. Okay. So really, this dark grayed out portion here represents the Wilds 20th plat, as was approved at the last meeting. And the alternatives that Moore Engineering has put together were, for one, the first one, and I apologize if I don't go in order, but essentially it's extending the roadway down to just past Deb Drive. And forgive me, I know the question was asked at the last meeting on, why is Deb Drive here and why is Deb Drive up here? I'm not gonna be able to answer that tonight, but for the sake of this discussion, this last intersection here is for this report considered Deb Drive. So there's an alternate to construct it just past this. Then there's an alternate to get it to the Wild's 10th plat, where there is right-of-way now here platted. I believe it's considered 61st Avenue. So another alternate to construct 9th Street down to that point. The idea there being, if and when future phases of the Wilds come forward and they want to construct a roadway within that right-of-way, 9th Street is already established down to that point. And then there's an alternate for extending 9th Street West as far south as we can, pretty much down to our city limits. I caution that, we would have to work with the city of Horace in order to encroach their right-of-way on 78th. So we may not be able to build the full section all the way down here unless we get an encroachment agreement with them to occupy the right-of-way and finish that kind of construction activity. We have not had those discussions with them, so I'm not sure where that would fall. When I look at this, there's a couple of things to consider. And again, obviously the one impact is the money and the financial burden, which is certainly something significant to consider. But the other thing that is difficult to maybe play out is not only from a financial impact, but just the burden of future special assessments. And so underneath all of the alternatives, aside from getting the road extended to the city limits, if we stop this 9th Street West, say at Deb Drive or at the Wilds 10th plat, inevitably sometime in the future, we will have to continue that roadway down to our city limits, hopefully when a road is extended down to 64th through the city of Horace. But that smaller, whatever section we have remaining now is another regional assessment that we will have to create and spread over the neighborhood. It's not necessarily at that point a matter of how much it costs. It's what we've seen in these developing areas is an increased frustration level for quote unquote perpetual, never ending special assessments. And so, it's just something again to consider. My, I guess my personal recommendation would be if we were to, at least if we're going to proceed with building it down to the city limits, I would recommend that we don't necessarily build our full traditional collector roadway section, a roadway divided with a decorative median. I would recommend that we, shortly after Deb Drive, transition into a narrow 2-lane, less aesthetic section as we get down to our city limits, anticipating that in the foreseeable future, if and when that road is even extended to 64th, it will likely not extend in the same section that we built to the north. So, but again, what the engineer's report right now is recommending is that we proceed with bid alternates and get final construction dollars in front of us before we make a final determination on whether to proceed and how far south to proceed. again, there's a lot of other discussion points and detail in this engineer's report, but it all, for the most part, is there to support the fact that it is feasible to extend the infrastructure into this development as requested and petitioned by the developer.
Commission President Dardis, can I make one comment?
Please, Mrs. Fisk.
Okay, and Dustin, you can elaborate on this because when the Wilds was being built on the north side of 52nd, we went through this exact same thing. How much of 9th do you put in right away because you have these tracts of land that aren't developed yet, knowing full well that continuing to develop it, we would have to reassess that small portion back out to everybody. So it's either that or you build the whole thing and you assess them for all of it all at once. So it's like a catch-22. It's really difficult. And there's just no right or wrong way because we need the roads. And it's you either build it all now and everybody pays even on the huge undeveloped tracts, or you do it in pieces and they pay later. And it's very unfortunate. And I do believe that's how it was done in the past, correct, Dustin? It was kind of a piecemeal back and forth.
Yeah, specifically on the north side of 52nd, that Wilds development, what we tried to do there, which got to be an administrative headache and pretty much an impossible task at staying, at least staying equivalent, if you will. With the subsequent phases, we did our typical half a mile each way, and we drew a fictitious line along that south, wherever we stopped the road, we only assessed to that boundary, and we developed estimated costs and spread it over the neighborhood just to that 1/2 mile each way, which then got to be difficult when we extended the road a few years later and we didn't include the other properties to the north. What ended up happening is a discrepancy between, call it those that paid for the phase 3 versus the phase 2 versus the phase 1. There were some discrepancies in terms of a comparison of cost per square foot or cost per linear foot, however you want to, whatever unit you want to use. But so for example, the first phase of that 9th Street cost somebody, $1 a square foot. And then the second phase came and it was 80 cents a square foot. And then the third phase came and all of a sudden it was $1.75 a square foot. And so that's kind of what took place north of 52nd Avenue. And that's why we've been proceeding with this development and creating a large regional district like this that encompasses everybody each phase. And so the challenge now is if we have 4 or 5 phases, everybody is getting 4 or 5 assessments for that particular project. So
well, I certainly like the idea of the alternate bids that we can pick and choose as to how we want to proceed on this development. And of course, we have the opportunity then to evaluate the contractor's efficiencies if you do it all at once too. So that's the positive part of this. Do you have anything else for us, Mr. Scott?
Yes, sir. President Dardis, I would like to, generally when I go through an engineer's report, I like to put a little focus on a funding breakdown. And what you see on the screen now is a summary put together with anticipated assessment costs. The total project right now, they're estimating to be about $5 million. Of that $5 million, there is a share that would be paid by Casserole Water. So that leaves a total assessment figure of just over $4.4 million. And they broke out the cost based on how we would traditionally assess this type of improvement out following our city's special assessment policy. And that is coming up now with these dollars here. So wanted to point at that and then scroll right down to the preliminary assessment spreadsheet that they put together and put a little focus on the existing lots out in this neighborhood. So for example, in the Wilds 9th edition or in the Wilds 7th and 8th edition, you can start to see that there's anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 on average of an assessment to those existing properties, mostly relating to the regional improvements of 9th Street West, and there's also a regional storm sewer component. So additional retention ponding and trunk storm mains. So again, just wanted to point that out before I turn it over for additional comments, questions, and final decision.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Scott?
Mayor Doris, I agree with your comment that it's great that we would go and do the alternate bidding here. That way we're going to see some real costs, and then we know which is the best way to go with how far to extend our infrastructure to the south.
Yeah, there might be some real efficiencies at doing it all at once versus if you piecemeal it out. So
right,
it would be good to see that. Any other questions for Mr. Scott on district number 1331? Anything additional for us, Mr. Scott?
No, sir, I do not.
All right. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
I'll make the motion to approve the engineer's report.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Commissioner Olson moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Jurdovic seconds. Been moved and seconded to accept the engineer's report for sewer, water, storm, and street improvements in District 1331. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is.
I do have one question. Dustin, if you put that screen back up. It looked like there were 2 action items, or do we accomplish that all in one? By approving your report, does that direct you to prepare the draft task order? Or do you need a separate motion for that?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Olson. I generally haven't done this in the past, but with this particular project, I did want to do that. I did want to get a separate motion that would direct me then to work with our consultant and get a task order in order for the final design services and construction services. So yes, if we could, I don't know if we can reopen that or not. Quite frankly, and maybe this is a question for John or Tina, but I will say that the master service agreement that we have in place and the policy that was put forth with that, it does technically give staff the authorization to move forward with the task order. And this task order will be over the $50,000 threshold that Tina would have authorization to sign for. So it will come back to the commission anyway. So again, I kind of wanted from a transparency standpoint to receive that direction specifically though from the commission in this case with this project.
Mr. Commission President, you could do a second motion for the second bullet item.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'll make that motion then, since I brought it up, to direct the city engineer to prepare a draft task order for this improvement district.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdovic. It's been moved and seconded to direct the city engineer to issue a task order for this 1331. Is there any further discussion? Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 7, vacation balance rollover for commission to consider. Mrs. Fisk.
Good evening, Commission President, Commissioners. Again, due to the COVID situation that we've been going through since March, we have had a number of employees that have not been able to take vacation time. We have a policy where you cannot roll over more than 240 hours into the next year. And if we were to have the employees keep that number down, we wouldn't have enough staffing to do the work that we need to do through the summer and the fall and the winter. And so at this time, I'm requesting that you allow employees until December 31st of 2021 to get their vacation hour balance to 240 or less. That will give them an extra period of time to work down that balance.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisk. Any questions of Mrs. Fisk?
I just have one. While we were working from home and other places where staff required to work, or were they not allowed to take time off? I'm just curious.
Very good question, Commissioner Olson. What happened was we sent staff home, and we said that if they could work from home, we asked them to work from home or required them to work from home. We also had some staff that were not able to do their jobs from home, so those staff people, they were not able to always work a full 40 hours a week, and we did still pay them. That was part of our protocol, that we were asking them to go home for their safety, so we paid them. And we did not, unless somebody actually was taking a physical vacation, we did not use vacation time for anyone.
Okay.
Approximately how many employees are we talking?
I don't have the number in front of me. This affects mainly the longer term employees because you have to be here for quite a while to be able to accrue that kind of vacation. So I know that there's some in PD, and I know there's some at Public Works for sure, because they're the ones that they're the essential employees and it affected them the most.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes sense. I would make the motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdovic. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Rolfs. Been moved and seconded to accept the balance rollover request by Mrs. Fisk, City Administrator. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Item number 8, Mr. Scott.
Thank you again, Commission President Dardis, members of the Commission. Construction updates, I don't have much. In terms of traffic impacts, the majority of those are coming from our water distribution project that KPH has been working on, where we do have 6th Street Northwest closed. We've got some shoulder closures of 9th Street Northeast, and also shoulder closures of 15th Street Northwest. So some traffic impacts there. Then the development project over along 9th Street West and 32nd Avenue West, there are some lane closures and lane shifting going on over there as they make some utility connections. Otherwise, the majority of the city projects we have right now are really not overly impactful to the public. We do have a commercial site down on 40th Avenue, the Accelerated Greenworks site, that has installed a new driveway. So they had some lane closures on 40th Avenue. The driveway has been installed, and we're hoping that all that can be cleared up here by the end of the week. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Scott? All right. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Item number 9, City Administrator's Report. Mrs. Fisk.
Good evening again, Commission President and Commissioners. I have a few items here. First of all, Saturday, given the protest that turned into more of a rioting type issue, there was an emergency declaration put into place in Fargo and along with that in West Fargo. And John Shockley can probably speak to this, our attorney, but I do believe at this point that has to be approved by, I mean, it's basic, it went and it ended, but does it still need to be approved by City Commission as a whole?
Well, great question, Tina. It is in effect for a period of 7 days. If the commission wants to extend it beyond 30 days, that would, or beyond 7 days, that would take commission action. If you do nothing, it just expires in 7 days, which would be next Saturday night.
Okay.
So it's up to the commission.
There is a copy of the West Fargo Emergency Declaration in your message boxes, as well as a copy of the Governor's Emergency Declaration. I provided those for you today to all the commissioners. At this point in time, I don't see a need for us to extend it. There are some rumors going around our community this evening that the police department might be busy again tonight, but they might be just rumors, and we'll rely on our very capable law enforcement community or interim chief Boyer to address that if he'd like. But I don't see a need at this point if we have the 7 days of which to operate under this existing one. That request came late, and thank you, Mr. Shockley, for your quick work. Came from a request of the Governor Burgum in the numerous phone calls that we were having throughout the day, and Mayor Mahoney and myself were on a call with the governor and some of his staff, and when it was getting at a critical point, that's when we wanted the National Guard to come in and assist in some critical areas that we'd be, even with the 200 officers that we had engaged, we'd have a problem. So our emergency declaration is a formal ask of the governor to bring, state troops onto the streets. And it was deemed an absolute necessary for the protection of our public, so we did it.
Okay. With that, I have a couple other items that I should ask you if you want to extend it or just let it lapse at the end of the 7 days.
My recommendation is we let it lapse. Commissioners, that appropriate with you? All right,
Okay.
very good, thank you. We have a consensus nodding of heads.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll get into my other items. We have Jim and Tracy, his accountant in his office, and myself have started some of the preliminary budget meetings with, we've spoken with some of you, and we've been meeting with some of the department heads. They're going very, very well. As we have more information, we will be getting that out to you. But things are moving along even with this COVID process going on. So Jim's done a fantastic job, and so has Tracy, and it's really going well. We are working on, speaking of COVID, revising our return to work plans based on the change in the state level. And once we get that all ironed out, I will be sending that out to you and also discussing it with staff. Jenna and Pierre and I met this afternoon and had some discussions about it. And so we will keep everybody posted, and I will keep all the department heads posted so they can inform their staff of any changes that would take place. A couple other things that we're looking into effective today is we are looking into testing for all of our staff that are non-essential, that have not already been tested for COVID. And the National Guard is looking into giving us some time slots next week. And what that is right now the police department gets tested, I believe, on a regular basis, but I know the fire department gets tested, all their officers, every 2 weeks. And Dan informed me today that as of today, nobody is yet to test positive. And considering that they, like the police officers, are right on the front lines with all the COVID patients going in and helping them, I think that says a lot about what an awesome job that our chief of fire department, Dan, is doing, and our interim chief of police, Jerry, is also doing, with no positive cases. But with that being said, we want to make sure that any of our staff that hasn't had that opportunity, that is coming back now that this is available, that we're able to have them test and give them that assurance that their coworkers have been tested. And then we'll see if we'll do another period in 2 weeks, or how we'll handle that going forward. We also have a number of departments, I can't talk, that are doing the antibody testing. So that is our essential workers. That will be like police and fire and public works. We'll be getting the antibody testing taken care of, so that we know not only who tests negative, but who's already had it and is fine. And as far as fine goes, whatever that means. But we're looking into that because we want to take good care of our employees and make sure that they feel the most comfortable. So those are items that we're moving forward on with them. Last week, the vendors for the street fair were narrowed down, and I believe the list is getting compiled and will go out shortly, because that's being moved to later this summer, early fall. And we also had a change in the process for the police chief interviews. We had intended on doing another round of interviews of our top few candidates next week, or later this week, I'm sorry, but with all the activity between the death of the police officer in Grand Forks and the issues with the protests and so on and so forth, it was deemed to be best to put that off for a couple weeks and let everyone just kind of situate and start that process up again. And Jerry's doing a fine job, so there's really no reason to rush on that one. Last but not least, for those of you that are wondering about our special assessment process for the bond issue that you approved quite some time ago, this again got pushed off because of COVID. We will start the actual hearings or the meetings and informational meetings with the Special Assessment Committee later in June. And then that process, we'll have a formalized process I'll bring to you and show you what we're doing. And we will start meeting with them and getting information pushed out so that we can get all the districts, I believe there's 14 of them, certified before our October deadline. Because since we've issued that bond, we need to start paying it back. So we're working on those, and Dustin and Jim and everybody has been pushing the information out, making sure it's accurate, getting things in order so that we can work with John and everybody else and let the meetings begin. So I will keep you all posted on that process as well. And that's all I have for today.
Thank you. Anything for correspondence? I know that you forwarded some of it to the commissioners.
I have no additional correspondence other than what I forwarded to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioners,
anything?
Commission President. I'm sorry, Commission President, I did have one comment. One of the pieces of correspondence in there talked about issues that an individual was having, and Commissioner Olson asked if someone was going to follow up on that. And yes, I will be working with Dustin and Matt from Public Works, and we will see what the process is going forward to work with the individual. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any non-agenda items you'd like to bring forward?
I just have one question.
Commissioner Olson.
When does what's our best guesstimate that we'll have a in-person commissioners meeting again?
My hope, if nothing changes, is that our next commission meeting would be in person. That would be, I believe that we will have whoever the new individual is that replaces Commissioner Thorstad for sure, and then maybe not a second person. I think it would be best to, if possible, do all that within house and have everybody there so that we can properly swear people in and thank people. So that is my intention. If anybody has any issues with that, please reach out and let me know, okay? Thank you for the question, Commissioner Olson.
You can formally show me the door. That would be.
No, the door is locked.
You can't imagine how many commission or committee assignments I'm going to appoint you to, Mr. Thorstad. And my fellow commissioners will be voting with me. Anything else for non-agenda items for any of the commissioners? I have a couple things. I will be traveling to Grand Forks tomorrow to partake in the Cody Holte funeral. He does have family in the Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo area. There are some friends of mine who are first cousins with Cody's wife, so I'm going to be appearing there at the special invitation of Mayor Brown, which I'm very grateful for. There is drive-up testing going on in our community at Legacy Middle School on the west side, and it has been for several days. And I've been parking my pickup and observing that but there has been drive-up testing on the west side of Legacy Middle School, and they haven't been real busy, but it continues to go on, and that was a discussion that we've had with the National Guard and with public health that we also wanted testing. So the social media is telling the public that they can go there. So this past weekend was obviously a new experience for all of us. And I have to say that the frontline people in the community of West Fargo were absolutely brilliant in how they conducted themselves. To see the abuse, verbal and physical abuse that these officers were subjected to, and yet they remained patient and calm and extremely smart in what the command staff directed those men and women to do. At a point in time when it was the most critical downtown, West Fargo had 22 on the main skirmish line. So we did our part. We were certainly very engaged, and of course, the officers were also out here protecting our city property when they were in West Fargo. So I could not possibly be any prouder of our fire department, our police department, and all those involved in what they worked on this weekend. I am on the Red River Valley Task Force for COVID. We continue to have, Tina and I are updated daily by Public Works. I also have a meeting with the state agencies once to twice a week, depends upon how we need it. We are concerned that with the governor lifting some restrictions last week, that the public is going to let their guard down. This is not over. We need to continue to wash our hands, and wash our hands. We continue to please consider masks. From last week to this week, in the public buildings, the amount of masks are probably less than 50% of what they were. So I encourage our public and my fellow commissioners to please be vigilant with this. We're going to, they think with all of the activities of this weekend, there were a lot of people that went downtown to observe the terrible activities that were going on down there. They absolutely expect our numbers to start going back up again. So to the public, please be vigilant and safe. Again, to our, I just can't share with you enough how proud I was of our first line responders and what they were dealing with. It was the worst of worst conditions of the way they were abused. We had officers whose face shields were shattered by the rocks that hit them in the face, but fortunately they had good equipment. So for previous commissioners as well as present commissioners, thank you for your support in buying the necessary riot shields and helmets, as well as those face guards, because it certainly, there were 4 officers that were treated for injuries from the rocks and bricks. They were throwing bricks, 2 with concussions and 2 with abrasions and cuts from the rocks hitting them. So under the circumstances and what the situation presented, our officers come out of it pretty well. But nonetheless, they certainly were subjected to some very difficult times. Anybody else with non-agenda items? All right. I'd entertain a motion, please.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdovic. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Olson seconds. Thank you all so very much. If you get a chance, reach out to the police and fire department. Thank them again for all that they've done. We stand adjourned. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.